What kind of girl walks into a land ruled by wind, dust, and danger, with nothing but a worn dress, a thin hope, and a heart that refuses to die? Emily Rose did. The Montana wind had teeth that morning. It tore across the open land, sharp and heartless, pulling at Emily's brown wool dress and biting at her cheeks. The red dust rose in swirling clouds around her boots, staining everything in sight. It made the whole world look like it was bleeding into the sky. She had walked the last miles alone, her feet aching, the hem of her dress heavy with grit. At 19, she should have had softness on her face, the glow of girlhood. But Emily carried the quiet strength of someone who had survived too much. Her green eyes stayed steady on the land in front of her. She had been alone since childhood. Life had taught her one lesson again and again. No one saves you but yourself. Now she stood at the edge of the Double S Ranch, hoping for a chance to start over. The ranch stretched wide across the open land. Long barns, weather-beaten fences, and a bunkhouse built low against the wind. It looked rough, harsh, lonely, but she had nowhere else to go. She walked toward the porch where 5 cowboys sat whittling and talking low. Their voices died the moment they saw her, all eyes fixed on her, the attention hitting her like a weight. A young cowboy with bright red hair leaned forward with a smirk. "Well now," he said, "look what the wind blew in." The others laughed under their breath. Emily kept her chin up and spoke to the oldest man, the one with the gray beard and the hard eyes. "I'm looking for the man in charge," she said. "I heard you might need a cook." The man, Silas, pushed himself up slowly. His gaze ran over her from bonnet to boots, sharp and cold. It felt like he was measuring her for weaknesses. "We had a cook," he said. "Old fella drank too much and set half the kitchen on fire. He took off for the mountains last week." "I don't drink," Emily said, "and I can cook, I can clean, I can mend. I work hard." "Red," the smirking cowboy snorted. "I can think of some hard work she can do." Heat crawled up her neck, but she held her place. She kept her eyes on Silas, hoping somewhere inside him was a decent man. That was when she saw him. He wasn't with the others. He stood by the corral fence, fixing a strip of leather with slow, careful hands. Tall, lean, dressed in worn clothes that didn't match the quality of his boots. His dark hair moved in the wind as he worked quietly, apart from the crude laughter on the porch. Emily felt his eyes before she saw them. Storm gray, calm, watching her with a strange, quiet intensity. Unlike the others, he didn't stare at her like she was something to claim or judge. His gaze felt different. Steady, clear, almost protective. It shook her more than the cruel words of the others. He looked away first, but the moment stayed with her. Silas finally sighed. "All right. The cook's quarters are behind the main house. You start tonight. If the food's no good or you cause trouble, you're gone. Pay is $10 a month plus room and board." It was almost nothing, but it was more than she had. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice steady though her legs felt weak. A younger cowboy named Jed walked over to show her the way. His grin was lazy and careless. "This way, darling," he said. "We'll take real good care of you." She ignored the warning in his tone and followed him. She had survived far worse than crude men. The next days became a hard routine. Emily woke before sunrise. She built the fire, hauled water in the freezing morning, cooked oatmeal, fried bacon, cleaned every tin plate, and scrubbed the long table until it shone. Her bread rose warm and golden. Her stews filled the room with smells the men had nearly forgotten. They behaved better, but not by much. They watched her, whispered about her, threw small jabs that reminded her she didn't belong. Still, she worked. It was the only way she knew to survive. And always, she felt the presence of the quiet cowboy. His name, she learned, was Jacob Stone, the ranch owner's son. He rarely spoke, but small things began to appear near her kitchen door. Water buckets already filled, firewood neatly split, the kind of help no one claimed. He never said a word about it. Sometimes she saw him through the kitchen window as she kneaded dough. working with calm hands, moving with a quiet strength. There was sadness in him, something deep and hidden, but she could not guess why. And she tried not to wonder. But she did. The fragile peace shattered when Red rode back from town with supplies and gossip. That night at dinner, with all the men seated, he leaned back in his chair and smiled cruelly. Had a chat with the bartender in Dusty Creek. Red said loud enough for all to hear. Says he remembers a girl looked just like our new cook. Worked at a place called the Dove's Rest. Silence dropped heavy. The Dove's Rest was no hotel. It was a house of shame, a place people whispered about. Emily froze. The ladle trembled in her hand. "You're mistaken," she managed to say. Red smirked. "Am I? Seems like the oldest story there is." Every eye in the room turned hard. Her past, real or imagined, was written on her in their minds. She searched their faces. No understanding. No trust. And when her gaze reached Jacob at the far end of the table, he didn't look at her. He said nothing. His silence cut deeper than Red's lie. Emily placed the ladle back into the pot with calm hands and walked out of the room. Each step felt like walking through cold water. Behind her, the voices broke into harsh whispers. Outside, snow began to fall thick and fast, covering the world in white. Inside, her heart froze first. How much pain can one heart hold before it breaks? And how much truth can one person carry before it finally comes out? Snow kept falling over the Double S Ranch, turning the land white and cold as the silence that followed Emily everywhere. The men no longer bothered with whispers. Their eyes told her everything. They believed Red's lie. In their minds, she was no longer the girl who cooked and cleaned and worked harder than any of them. She was a shame they wanted gone. Emily refused to break. She woke even earlier and worked even harder. The cold bit into her hands. The buckets of water froze to her skirt on the long walk from the well. Her fingers blistered and bled as she chopped wood alone. But she never stopped. The work kept her standing, even when her heart felt like it was turning to ice. The secret kindness from Jacob stopped. No wood at her door. No water waiting for her. No silent help. He stayed away from her, kept his head down, and worked with a faraway look in his eyes. Emily saw him only in passing, and every time she tried to look at him, he looked away. The hurt was sharp and deep. She had thought he was different from the others. She had trusted the quiet steadiness in his eyes. But now, he was like everyone else. She told herself she did not care. But the lie tasted bitter. The men grew bolder. Red most of all. He walked past her with a smirk every chance he got. He whispered things under his breath when she gathered eggs or carried firewood. Little threats. Little reminders that he believed she had no one to protect her. He believed Jacob did not care. Then one cold afternoon, while the storm paused long enough for the world to catch its breath, Emily went to the barn to collect eggs. The air inside was warm compared to the icy wind outside. She moved quietly between the stalls, placing each egg carefully in the basket. A shadow blocked the doorway. Red Callahan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Looking for something, little bird," he said. Emily straightened and held the basket tight. "I have what I came for. Move!" Red stepped closer, the ugly smile growing on his face. "You know, a woman like you should be grateful," he said. "Men around here get lonely. Maybe you could give something back for all that fine food you cook." He reached toward her face. "Don't touch me," she said sharply. Red laughed. "I like it when they fight back." He reached again. "Enough." The voice came from behind Red. Calm, low, cold. Red turned. Jacob Stone stood in the shadow of the doorway, his gray eyes fixed on Red with a quiet anger that made the air heavy. He had come to the barn for a simple tool, but when he heard Red's voice, something inside him snapped. Red scoffed. "Stay out of this, Stone. The girl belongs in the bunkhouse with the rest of us. She—" Jacob moved before Red could finish. His fist hit Red's jaw with a force that echoed through the barn. Red stumbled, shocked, clutching his face. Jacob followed. His movements were not wild or angry. They were controlled, precise, and full of a deep, cold fury that had been trapped inside him for far too long. He drove Red backward until they crashed out into the yard. The other men rushed out of the bunkhouse, forming a circle as Jacob struck again, and again, and again. Red tried to swing back, but Jacob fought like a man who had been holding back his entire life. His silence had broken. His patience had ended. He fought like a man defending something he could not bear to lose. Red finally collapsed into the snow, beaten and bloody. Jacob stood over him, breath coming in harsh clouds. "You will not speak to her," Jacob said in a voice that made the air go still. "You will not look at her. You will stay away from her, or I swear I will finish what I started." Red's face twisted with rage and humiliation, but he nodded. Jacob stepped back, the crowd parting for him. He turned and looked at Emily. For a brief moment their eyes met. Emily saw something she had not seen before. Fear for her, relief, pain. Something deeper she did not dare name. But just as quickly as it appeared, Jacob broke the gaze. He stepped away, back into silence, back into the shell he had been carrying for years. Emily stood in the snow, basket clutched to her chest, more confused than ever. He had defended her. He had fought for her. But when she looked for answers, he turned away again. The days that followed changed everything, and nothing. The men no longer mocked her out loud. They cleared their plates. They lowered their eyes. They kept their distance. Jacob's fists had spoken louder than any words. Yet Jacob still did not speak to her. His help returned, but in silence. Firewood at her door. Water waiting every morning. Tools fixed without a word. He protected her, but he would not face her. Then came the night of the fire. The wind howled loud enough to shake the walls. The storm pushed smoke back down the chimney, into the kitchen where Emily had worked since dawn. Her eyes stung. Her lungs burned. The small fire in the stove crackled louder and louder until she smelled something wrong. Heat. Too much heat. She opened her door and saw flames racing up the wall, feeding on dry wood growing faster than she could think. Her escape was cut off. Smoke filled the room. Her hands shook as she tried to force the window open, but it refused to move. The door behind her glowed orange as the fire climbed. She sank to the floor, coughing hard, the world spinning. Outside, men shouted. Snow fell. Flames roared. Jacob heard one voice missing from the chaos. Hers. He ran into the fire without a second thought. He tore through the burning kitchen, calling her name in a ragged voice she barely recognized. Through the smoke, she saw him crawling toward her, blankets soaked in ice water wrapped around him. "Emily!" he choked out, lifting her with shaking arms. Everything went black. She woke outside on the snow, the cold burning her skin. Jacob knelt over her, covered in soot, trembling, his hands shaking as he touched her face. "You're safe," he whispered, voice broken. "You're safe." For the first time, Emily saw him without walls, without silence, without fear. He cared deeply. But the storm that had saved her life had also changed everything. Because the men who watched Jacob carry her from the fire would soon whisper again, not about shame, but about who she belonged to and what price they would all pay for it. What happens when two people who saved each other must now face a world that wants to tear them apart? The fire changed everything on the Double S Ranch. It burned the kitchen to the ground. It burned the last of Emily's fear. And it burned away the quiet wall Jacob had carried around himself for years. But when the flames died, something darker began to rise. Whispers. Men who had lost food, warmth, and comfort to the storm now looked at Emily with new suspicion. They saw Jacob carry her from the fire, saw his face, raw with fear for her, and they didn't forget. Red Callahan healed slowly and watched everything with a venomous hatred. The storm outside grew worse. Days of snow trapped the ranch, sealing them all together. With hunger rising and tempers short, the men looked for someone to blame. And Red gave them a target. Emily. He twisted the truth until the men believed she was the reason for their suffering. The reason for Jacob's temper. The reason food was scarce. He whispered poison in the dark, turning their fear into anger. Jacob saw the change. Silas warned him the bunkhouse was restless, but Jacob stayed calm on the outside. Though inside, he was already fighting a storm bigger than any blizzard. One night they came, not with guns, but with hunger, fear, and too much anger for one cold room. Red pushed his way into the main house, dragging half a dozen men with him. "We're starving while she eats fine," Red shouted, pointing at Emily. "She's bad luck. She shouldn't be here." Jacob moved in front of her so fast she barely saw him. "You touch her," he said in a low voice, "and you answer to me." The house exploded into chaos. Men yelling, fists swinging, a lantern crashing to the floor. Jacob fought like a man with everything to lose. Emily grabbed a skillet and swung at a cowboy coming toward her. Silas tried to pull men apart, but the storm outside had already gotten into their blood. And then, a rifle fired. The sound froze everyone. Samuel Stone, Jacob's father, stood at the top of the stairs, gray eyes hard as iron. "Out," he said, "all of you." The men backed away, shame on their faces. Red spat on the floor before leaving. Hatred burned in his eyes. Samuel turned to Jacob. "In my study," he said. Emily touched Jacob's arm. "Be careful." Jacob nodded and went. Inside the study, Samuel didn't waste time. "That woman has brought trouble to my ranch," he said. "That trouble came from cowards who listen to liars," Jacob replied. Samuel narrowed his eyes. "Is she a passing comfort or something else?" Quote. Jacob didn't look away. "She is the woman I intend to marry." For the first time, Samuel's expression changed. Not approval, not anger, something else. Respect. "Then tomorrow at dawn," Samuel said, "you show these men who leads. You earn her place here, or you step aside." Jacob didn't sleep that night. He wrote Emily a letter he hoped she'd never need. It held every truth about his past, his shame, and his love for her. At dawn, he walked out into the icy yard. The men gathered. Red pushed to the front, eyes burning with hate. Jacob stood tall. "Emily Rose is my intended wife," he said. "She will be respected. Anyone who can't accept that can take his pay and leave." The yard fell silent. Red sneered. "You hide behind your father's name." Jacob stepped forward. "No, I stand on my own." Red drew his gun. Jacob was faster. One shot. Red screamed, dropping his pistol as blood soaked his hand. Jacob had shot clean through his gun hand, ending the fight without killing him. A humiliation worse than death. "Silas," Jacob said, "give him his pay. I want him gone before the sun climbs." The rebellion died right there in the snow. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The storm was finally over. Later that morning, Emily found Jacob's letter in his desk drawer. She read the truth he had carried for years. The memory of seeing her years ago in a saloon, the fear that froze him, the guilt that had haunted him, and the love that had been growing since the moment she stepped onto the porch. When he walked into the room, she ran to him and wrapped her arms around him. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." The world outside was cold, broken, and full of work, but something warm and steady had grown between them, something the storm couldn't touch. Months passed. Snow melted. The ranch healed. A new kitchen was built. A new life began. Emily didn't just survive anymore. She thrived. She turned the ashes of her old kitchen into a garden. She built a new place called the Hearth, where travelers and lonely girls could find safety, work, and hope. Jacob worked beside her every day, not as the owner's son, but as a partner, a man who had rebuilt himself from the inside out. And one quiet afternoon, under the open sky, they stood together on the porch of the Hearth and exchanged vows. Their wedding was simple and small, but their love was strong enough to fill the whole valley. They stood side by side, looking out over the land that had once nearly broken them. "Do you ever think about the past?" Emily asked softly. "Every day," Jacob said, "but it doesn't hurt anymore." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We all have ghosts, but we get to choose the ending." He kissed her forehead. "Our story is just beginning." Together they walked down into the sunlight, two people who had found love not in quiet days, but in fire, ice, and the wild promise of the West.